everyone, welcome to another edition of Metis Warrior here with Timothy and Alexandria.
Hello everybody.
And so today we have a special guest, Corran Pruden, and she's a powerful Metis woman who's definitely being taken to the court system by a Metis group.
Colonial court system.
Exactly, and she's being sued in an effort to try to silence her. And this is what we're talking about today. We do not want to silence Metis women. We want to empower Metis women and have them be able to speak out against the sexual assaults, the rapes, the corruption. They should not be silenced.
So Coran Pruden is from La Biche, Alberta, and again, she is a powerful Métis woman that has an inspiring story, and every Métis woman should have a voice, and their voice should be heard, and it should not be silenced by powerful, corrupt men, individuals out there. Their voice, they have a right to be heard. They have a right to ask questions without being intimidated whatsoever. Lateral violence, lateral damage.
And so if you take a look at your screen right here, you see the Fort McKay Metis Group CEO is charged with sexual assault. Now, we know people are innocent until proven guilty, but according to CBC News, and CBC, this is how you credit who you getting your story from. Just like we're crediting you, the next time you rip off one of our stories, be sure to credit us. But according to CBC News, Fort McKay Metis Group CEO is charged with sexual assault. And we know that there's sexual assaults that occur in many organizations, many Metis organizations, rapes. We know that there's a lot of corruption out there, folks, and it's time for the Metis women to speak out.
And again, this is Dwayne Roth, who is from Fort McKay Metis Group CEO, charged with sexual assault. One victim allegedly occurred La Biche, Alberta. So a prime example, if proven guilty of a powerful man or a man in position of power that is abusing his power over women, this cannot be allowed to happen. Every woman, Métis woman, has a right to ask questions, voice their opinion, and have their voices heard without being silenced by threatening, whether it be a court case, assault, or what have you. They have a right to speak.
Exactly. And so now you're going to hear our interview with Corran Pruden, and I hope everybody listens closely and pays attention. Here we go. Okay, folks, we have Corran Pruden joining Timothy and Alexandria here today. How you doing, Corran?
I'm doing great. Yourself?
We're doing great, and like I said, we feel quite honored that you've wanted to be on our show to be able to tell your story. It's quite the honor.
Well, it's an honor to actually be on this show because I listen to your show quite avidly.
That's great to hear, Coran. That means a lot. And I mean, we're working hard trying to bring stories. We're trying to bring truth, transparency, and accountability. And it's a hard road, but it's not an impossible road. Let's put it that way.
Well, I'm a firm believer in accountability and transparency. When we come from our ancestors who were basically roadside allowance people, and we're part of a collective, like not just as a local or a region or a province, but across Canada. We want to show people that the Métis represent that Métis integrity, and that we have to represent our ancestors, because the only thing that our ancestors had was their names, and that was it.
That's right.
I have a lot of I have a lot of respect for my ancestors, because they didn't have anything other than who they were and their identity, and that was it. That's all they stood for. And Canada didn't really recognize them until now.
Well, Corran, if we could, for the people that may not know you that's listening to the show, could we just say where you're out of, and go into a little bit of the issues you're seeing in your area, because you're out of Alberta, correct?
Yes, I am. I sit in a little town, 243 kilometers out of north of Edmonton,
Right.
in a town called Lac La Biche, Alberta.
Right.
And there's some issues that's going on within your Métis community there?
Yes, there has been issues here for probably for 20 some years. It seems like there's a pattern of misuse and misrepresentation in our community. We have close to 4,000 members in our region, and our region consists of Lac La Biche, Athabasca, Conklin, Anzac, Janvier, Fort McKay to Fort Chip.
Right. So, are you saying, or that you guys are you under the umbrella of the Métis Nation of Alberta?
Yes, we are.
Yeah, I'm just putting that out there because we have a lot of listeners in the United States as well that may not be familiar in the geography of it, and it's important that they sort of can pinpoint the location where this is happening, and this is really your opportunity to have your voice being heard. That's very important, that everybody has an opportunity to say their piece and have their voice being heard.
Right. And then especially being an Indigenous woman, where we're basically silenced if we ask for accountability or transparency. And it seems that over the years that I've been protesting for accountability and transparency, and in our bylaws, it states that if we want to see the books under the bylaw, Article 48.3 and 48.5, that if we wanted to view the books and we're in good standing, we're entitled to view the books.
Yeah, what I heard is a lot of the Métis Nation organizations are actually closing their books to members, and I'm finding that very strange and disappointing that they would not be transparent in that. But could you give us some examples of what people have said to you when you've asked for the books?
When I asked for the books, I was asking for the books and I asked in verbally at regional meetings. I asked to view the books in written form based on my good standing, and I used the articles to ask to view the books, but I never got to view the books since 2012. You might as well say until November the 6th of 2019. That's when we got to view the books, and that's when after elections, a new president came in, and he did the investigation, and they found out that our region was misused and misrepresented, and there was millions of dollars that weren't accounted for. Basically, 15 people were responsible for taking our funds, and not once were they accountable or transparent. And it came to the point where I got sued for defamation of character because I had posted a video in regards. I was doing a story on September the 5th, 2018. Elders were coming to me and telling me that they felt like they were discarded shoes.
Right.
And they were addressing the issues of like different locals that were representing them as a local in the region, and we had our six to seven locals at the time, and there was presidents and vice presidents that were consulting with industry, but none of this money was coming back to the region. And when we'd asked, like for funding or for anything, we were told there's no money, and our core funding was $169,000 a year, but then we found out there was millions of dollars. And none of that money came to the collective. So we started asking questions, and then we started, and that's when I got sued, basically because I was asking questions about certain locals. I was asking questions about where our collective funds were going and where were they allocated from, and who was responsible and how much. And because when we go to industry, when we get consulted by the industry, the money goes directly to the presidents, and we didn't get any information in regard to how much they were receiving. Like for instance, Conklin local, the local in Conklin, they were receiving shares, and some of the members that profit shares would get $4,000, while some were only getting 1,800, and some were being denied, and it was basically nepotism. We have some women out there that are living in campers and campers, and they still have honey pots. The housing conditions are very poor. We had the premier come out there, and she basically was embarrassed by our presidents, and not one president was there other than Daniel Cardinal to represent the MNA.
Yeah, but you know
So
what?
it's not just
I understand. I hear what you're saying, and before we get you to continue, I mean, as a member in good standing, I mean, isn't it your legal right to be shown the books or anything that you want to see? I mean, being part of a member of an organization in good standing, isn't that one of the obligations of that organization to provide to their membership? Well, what's the point of joining an organization if you get no benefits or you get no support, you get no accountability? So what's the plus to it if you're denied access to information that should be available to membership at any time that it's being asked of?
there's no point. We're basically being used as a collective to receive funds, and we're not. There's no development socially, economically, long term. There hasn't been any kind of growth or development in our region for years, and we've been asking and requesting, and basically asking for accountability, and we never received it. And now that there's a new president and vice president, it seems to be the same old pattern. When we got, like for instance, the COVID funds, some of our citizens received in Alberta received $300 a piece. Some received $200 as a piece. When technically, I think if it's a collective, everybody should receive the same amount across Alberta.
Right.
Yeah, let me ask you a question here. Who do you think is responsible for that 50? And we know we're just giving a rough idea here of who was responsible for that $15 million that went missing.
Well, the money that it has to come from the top. Basically, the provincial and the provincial council are the ones that decide how much the regions are getting.
Right.
And then from the regions, it goes to the locals, and then from the locals, it goes to the citizens.
Right.
So by the time it makes it to the citizens, it's done been tampered with so much that the citizens are not getting anything. And what I want,
we basically got $200 a piece.
Yeah.
$200.
And what I want people out there to understand, Coran, is that we advocate for the Métis people all over Canada and in parts of the United States. A lot of the organizations that we go after are doing the same thing that you're saying. They're tampering with the money. The money's disappearing. And so these organizations that sit on the board and these people that are tampering with the money, they speak out against us because we're calling them on their corruption. But we don't care if their leadership likes us, as long as the people understand that we're fighting for them just like you're fighting for them.
I've been fighting for our region for probably now since 2012.
Wow,
this has been a long time. Sometimes I was petitioning outside the office by myself, and there was times where that's the reason why I decided to run, because I thought if I gave it all I could give, basically, and I kept on asking for accountability. And when I bring up the issues pertaining to the financials or any of the funding that we heard through the grapevine that these local presidents, these 15 people, were receiving, but yet our people weren't benefiting, and the money wasn't coming to the regional table, and they were able to hide it until after elections, and that's when we found out millions were taken. and then there was no consequences or repercussions for them taking the money. So if that's the case over the years, well, guess what the next leaders are going to do? They're going to use our resources. They're going to use the money that's allocated for us as a collective to benefit themselves. We're not benefiting. None of us are. And we're in this, like in Lac La Biche, we have serious cases of extreme racism and hatred towards our Indigenous people.
Yeah.
And we're sitting in a pot of oppression because there's no jobs and we're competing with immigrants.
Well, you know what, Corianne, what I have to say too is that as Métis people, we've been oppressed from the Canadian government, but now what's happening is our own so-called leaders of our organizations are further keeping us oppressed, so we don't have rights, we don't have a voice, because again it all comes down to the almighty dollar. And like I said, I mean, we've got to band together and we have to have a collective voice where we have to say that this is not right, this is not what we want as a people. But I agree with nepotism, it's rampant everywhere. Unless there's a complete purge and getting rid of nepotism, it's just a vicious circle that is going to continue over and over, and we will continue to be an oppressed people because our own so-called leadership in our organizations are keeping us oppressed, because we are just a number. We're just a number that gets submitted to the government. The more numbers you have, the more potential funding, and then the leaders are getting the funding and they are doing with it as they see fit, not as the people need the money, and that's not right.
Well, we go back from the time that the Europeans came into the continent of Canada.
Right.
Canada was actually, it wasn't, how do you say that? It was all crown land at one time. It went from one end to the other. It was basically treaty, Swampy Cree, Plains Cree, Moose, like all different tribes. And then the Europeans came in, and that's where we were created basically as half-breeds at one time.
Yeah.
And then over time, the government has taken the Indian Act and is watering down the treaties. And basically, you go treaty, then you go Bill C-31, then you go Bill C-1, Bill C-2, C-3, B-3-4. And as with the Métis Nation of Alberta, we're not watered down yet. There's some benefits to the identity, but we have to prove our we have to have genealogical records to prove who we are. And there's in Alberta right now, we're competing with these third-party entities that are combining Métis and status, and that's a fraudulent act based on having a collective. So how is it that the INAC or the government isn't, putting their foot down and stating, you have to provide genealogical records and you have to provide proof that you're not status. So there's a combination of both, and there's a combination of dual status on settlements, where some people are Bill C-31 and Métis. So how do you try to clean that out? Because people aren't going to come forward, because some people are born status and then they use their step-parents' name and they change it. They use the Métis name so they can get the Métis identity, and there's nobody that's going to check it out or be honest enough to tell the truth. And then there's some of us, like myself, I'm not Métis enough to get into the Métis settlements.
Right.
I'm not status. I have to pay for my own education. I have to pretty much pay for everything, and whereas other people, they got the best of both worlds.
That's right, and that's not right. But another question too, Audrey Portress being the president of the Métis Nation of Alberta, I mean, her being a woman, wouldn't you think that she would see the struggles that Indigenous women have with you know, discrimination, racism, you would think holding that seat of power, she would be sympathetic, and you know, when strong women speak out, they would have the ability to speak and ask for transparency and accountability. Because if we go back into history and our Aboriginal ancestors in the tribes, women were sacred. They had power. Women were respected. So when you turn to be Métis, what happens to us as women when the Aboriginal people respected the women? They were honored. I mean, where did it all go wrong?
When it comes to being a matriarch and a traditional pipe carrier, and I basically had to go back into my lineage and learn the traditions myself, because I lived a colonialized life. That's basically how we're taught at school,
right?
The public school systems. We're educated as we live in two worlds: Indigenous world views and the Western world views. We're caught in between. And as a woman, and when it comes to Audrey Patra, she does somewhat stand with us. It's just that we need more women to be educated in regards to where we fit into that Indigenous world views, and we need to be educated, and we need more funds to educate, like teachers and teaching traditional congruences and ceremonies and the things that we're lacking, that the government and I guess you could say society don't want us to be. And when we don't have leadership that supports us in regards to who we are, that's where we lose in our societies. We lose in our communities. We lose, like our women are looked down upon and shunned because of who we are, and they make fun of us.
Yeah.
They make fun of our children, our intergenerational traumas, like residential schools. They say, "Oh, well, you know, your cousin stole from my store," or the racism is really extreme. We're battling not just for ourselves. We're battling for women across Alberta. We're battling for women across Canada, and we're not respected the way we should be respected in a matriarchal tradition. And there's no traditional congruences that shows that or can prove it. And when I try to educate people in regards to this, they're so colonialized, they laugh at it.
I know.
All they see is dollar signs. Oh, when you were on your platform and you were doing your platform, well, I had leaders that were laughing at me because of the fact that they had more money, money was granted to them by industry. They weren't looking at the humanistic factors, the biological factors, the sociological factors, or the physiological factors. They were looking at the dollar signs, or they weren't looking at the humanistic factors, and that's where we get lost. And they say, "Oh, well, she doesn't know what she's talking about." Well, how do you tie the land and the identity together? You identify the traditional congruences of the identity and the people. That's how it's done.
Let me ask you a question. Do you think there's a hope that the MNA can turn it around and start doing the right thing for the Métis people in Alberta?
Yes, I do believe there is. There's many youth out there that are getting more educated in regards to who we are as a people. And we're not just a people, we're a collective, a large collective in Alberta. And we have to start standing up with each other as a united front, not nepotism or because we're friends with the mayor, or we're friends with this leader, or we're friends with that leader. None of these leaders really represent the collective. They're just there. It seems to me it's like the dollar signs are more important than the humanistic factors or the traditions or the land. And that's what we should be focusing on, is trying to teach the traditional components to make a stronger identity, and then bringing back the culture of who we are. Otherwise, we're lost, and it's never going to be attainable.
Yeah, and I have hope for the MNA, and I'm hoping that what you're saying, it will reach the leaders' ears there, and they will actually try to do a turnaround and do the right thing for the people in Alberta, because you got so many corrupt organizations popping up in Alberta now. Like you got other organizations popping up in Alberta right now, and with those organizations, they're just trying to rape the Métis people basically. And so the real organization there is the Métis Nation of Alberta, but the corruption and nepotism so bad that if we could get rid of the nepotism and have somebody in there that's going to do the right thing and issue out the money the right way, then yeah, then we can start making progress.
And you know what? Go ahead.
See, we are a collective. We are a collective across Alberta.
Right.
We should all benefit collectively as a whole.
Yes.
And our collective rights cannot be transferred over to an individual right. And that's where people need to learn. If these individual rights are not a collective right, and see, sometimes we have these third-party entities that take our organization and go and, meet with industry, but they're not representing as the collective. They're representing for their individual rights and taking the money and pocketing it where we're not benefiting. And that's the biggest issue. If you're going to go to industry and consult on behalf of our names, which is 4,000 and some names, well, I sure hope that you come back to the regional table and feed the rest of us, because you're using our names to attain these funds.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what you were talking about before in your area in regards to treaty and Métis, even my own family history, because my great grandfather Joseph Paul, actually, he was part of a band. And we see all over social media with Pass Chase in Alberta. My great grandfather is now, they call them the Edmonton Stragglers. So my great grandfather was, he was part of a band. I have his band number, but then they became again those stragglers, where they became Métis. So again, there's the division, or people, the government forcing them to choose either or you have people that are using both in different ways. So that's where part of our identity and culture gets lost, because it just becomes a big melting pot mess where we're losing identity of who we are as Métis people. I mean, we're children of two worlds, and a lot of times even I've encountered racism where I'm looked down by white people, and I'm looked down by some status people. I've been called a lot of derogatory names riding on buses, because I sometimes I don't know where I really fit in. And the purpose of doing our shows is that so my children will not have that feeling of not knowing where they belong in Canada, because it's a very frightening feeling when you don't know who to identify or who you are. Because in my case, again, I grew up not knowing my culture, because I was told that if I mentioned who I was, I would get teased at school, beat up at school. So there was a lot of people that were hiding, because again, like you said, in Alberta, myself growing up in Manitoba, there's a lot of racism when I grew up, and there's still a lot of racism because we're not sure where we fit, and the government is not doing us a service, because residential schools and all that kind of stuff, they were trying to get the Indian part out of us and colonialize us with propaganda, and again teaching only the colonial view of Canadian history.
Well, that's exactly what the government has been doing. This is what they've been doing since settlers came in here, was to whitewash us and turn us into something that we're not. And see, with the treaties and the Métis, the INAC, the government needs to take fiduciary responsibility. They have a duty to put us where we belong. So then there's a sense of belonging. If we're First Nations, then we're First Nations. If we're Métis, we can't be using the Federal Indian Act to register as a Métis. That belongs to the First Nations, and the government needs to how do you say that, recognize what they're doing is confusing, but confusing our Indigenous people, and they need to draw a fine line or a better registry to put us where we belong. So then, and they could look at, okay, well, if this Corran Pruden is Métis, she's in a provincial registry. If so-and-so Corran is First Nation, then she's First Nation from whatever reserve, Heart Lake, Beaver Lake, or wherever. There's got to be a fine line. So when you look up these names, that's where you are. You're not, 1 minute your status and you go to the reserve, and then the next day you're Métis and you have a settlement card or an M&A card and using both. And that's where the confusion is, and that's what's creating so much hardship for our next generation. They need to know where they fit in. Otherwise, we're going to have children, future generations standing in a field all alone.
Yeah.
With no representation.
Let me ask you a question. Outside of them not showing you the books in Alberta and the disappearing of money, have you seen other forms of abuse of the Métis people by the M&A?
As far as I'm concerned, when it comes to the M&A, we're a strong collective, and I do believe there's benefits. There's a lot of benefits to be who we are as a collective. We just have to unite as a collective and work for the same purpose. If our money's going to be used for this, then it should be used across Alberta for everybody, especially housing, land, and actually try to meet the people's needs rather than just the leaders attaining this money for themselves. Yes, they're there to serve, but who are they serving if they only serve just their family or their so-and-so, or if leaders decide, like going to industry and basically, for instance, let me use this as an example. Say, for instance, our locals in our region go to meet with industry and they consult. And then, our vice president or our presidents decide, well, you know what, now that I know that Métis Nation have this, they can meet with this industry and attain money, well, then I'm going to send my business associate, my CEO, to go and use these resources for my business. But the only people that are benefiting is the person that owns the business, not the collective. And that's where the issue is misuse of the collective. And they trying to transfer it over to individual rights when that is so wrong. And it's fraudulent because what you're doing as a nonprofit organization is you're using these members to profit, but they're not attaining it. And that's fraud.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because the governments or these organizations are getting millions and millions of dollars. I mean, if everybody was to get the same amount, they could accomplish that. And like you said, nepotism, it shouldn't be who you know in the organization that will determine on what you get. That's not the way it should be.
It should be fairness across the board for everybody. If somebody goes out and represents us as a region, well, the whole entire region should benefit. Education, social and economic development, housing, infrastructure, you name it. And basically, nothing has been developed in our region, I'd say, for almost, how many decades?
Wow.
And it seems like the same old pattern. Like, we had one person stealing, misusing and misrepresenting our funds. Well, they got taken. They pretty much were taken to court. They lost in court. And it just seems like the last interim leaders did the same thing. No consequences or repercussions for them misusing and misrepresenting our collectives. So now these people pretty much went and decided to create their own entities and are representing themselves. But it's the same thing. Like they're doing it for their own purposes, not as a collective. And whose membership list are they using? Because we only have a certain amount of Métis in our communities. And which members are they using to attain that money? Did they take the M&A's membership list and members' names without consulting us first? That's the question that I've been asking for years. And how come when we ask about it, we're told there's no money, or we're told, Corran, we're going to sue you and we're going to sue you for $400,000. But not once was I ever served my collective rights or my human rights as a member of the Métis Nation of Alberta. Not once.
Well, how come, Corianne? How come? I mean, let's put this out there. How come you're asking legitimate questions? How come if you're asking questions about transparency and accountability, right away people want to do sue you or defamation? Why doesn't that happen to them? I mean, they're robbing the Métis people, and like you've said several times, there's no repercussions for them. But why are there repercussions for people that are seeking truth and just asking for answers that should be provided? It's just it's not an even playing field or an even organization when the same thing doesn't happen.
I like when I got sued, and I'll be honest, like I did get sued, and I pretty much felt like I wondered, like, okay, why is this happening to me? I had to go through, the election. Basically, my name was slandered across Alberta. I was I guess you could say they gave me all kinds of labels, radical. I'm a loudmouth, this and that. But not once did anybody answer my questions until the election was over. Then I was able to, with this new president in our region, to attain some of the questions that I wanted answered, and I was right. They were misusing and misrepresenting our funds, but nothing became of it. There was no repercussions. Nobody got charged, to the point where these people decided to go create another entity and do the same thing, but there was no repercussions.
Let me ask you a question, Coran. Let me ask you a question. Because I know we've been talking about a lawsuit here. Like, the audience that's listening is going to probably ask the question. Some people may know, like, who sued you?
I was sued by Fort McKay Metis, which was actually Local 63, one of the locals in our region.
But
and they transferred it over to Fort McKay Metis.
Well, Fort McKay Metis, or maybe I'm thinking of a different Métis organization. Isn't Fort McKay Metis? Aren't they the ones that broke away from MNA, or is that somebody else? Am I mixing them up with?
That's the same one.
Aha.
Those are the same ones.
Yeah, because I seen it all over where they broke away from the MNA, and there was a lot of news coverage about Fort McKay Metis.
But hold on, let me.
When they were representing the Métis Nation as the Local 63, the members in that local are actually going to court here against with the MNA. I think within the next week here on the 22nd and the 23rd sometime. In regards to some of those members don't even want to be represented as Fort McKay, and because some of them aren't happy, and I can't divulge most of the information because I'd like the people to speak for themselves, and some of them, they were offered, housing and these types of things, but some of these people have lived there all their lives, and now they have to answer to basically a dictator, which is I'm like, for myself, I was reprimanded for talking against him. Like they pretty much silenced me. They didn't want me to say anything at all. And this whole scenario started from me asking for the books, asking for accountability and transparency, and not once did I get it.
Let me ask.
To the point where they had to separate.
Wow.
Let me ask you this question: what was is the lawsuit still ongoing, or has it been dropped, or what was the outcome?
No, it's ongoing. It's ongoing, and the judge, I think the judge is going to basically render a decision, and I'm the one that's going to have to take responsibility for my actions in speaking out, and I had to defend myself.
Yeah, I think you asking for books and accountability is not defamation of any character. I think
and the thing is, Métis Nation of Alberta is a public entity.
Exactly. So public entities are open for discussion. And the thing about it is, for them to say that you're defamating their character by you speaking out against the corruption and them not wanting to release and be transparent with the financial records, that's absurdity. I don't see how this judge can rule in their favor.
Well, the thing is, I'm not a lawyer. and I'm not as educated as the lawyers that they hire. So they basically got me from the statements I made on Facebook, and I had posted a video of one of the ladies, elderly ladies, that stated some things in regards to the CEO, and apparently now the CEO is going up for sexual harassment charges against few women, and there's other two women that have come forward as well. So it wasn't really defamation of character. It was, well, they stated it was defamation and slander at the time, but I wasn't able to provide the proof, but now I can.
Exactly. And so there you go. And so, you know, there seems to be a lot of corruption there. And I just think that you're someone that was speaking out and you were demanding transparency and equality for all Métis there.
Yes, I was, and I like to this day, I take responsibility for my actions, and I uphold the integrity of the Métis Nation of Alberta and the citizens. But I felt so defeated because of the fact that I didn't have the money where they could afford these awesome lawyers. They could afford, you know, the courts, and whereas I couldn't, and I didn't have the funds, and I was at a disadvantage. And I had other things going on in my life that I had to deal with at the time, but my biggest issue was not being able to afford a really good lawyer, a civil lawyer. And if I would have had a civil lawyer, it would have been a different story.
Right. But you know what? To me, I mean, if you're speaking the truth and you're asking legitimate questions, I mean, you shouldn't need a high-priced lawyer, but of course they do, because they know how to manipulate the law. They know how to, I mean, they get paid to get loopholes, manipulate things, so that's what they do, and that's not fair again when people are just trying to seek legitimate answers, and then right away they get thrown into court about defamation of character, slander. I mean, but I mean, that's just a cover-up to cover up their corruption. And then we have a lot of men that are women are now coming forward in regards to sexual assault, sexual abuse. So that seems to be running rampant. They're trying to cover it up. So it seems that anybody that is trying to bring the truth forward they get attacked, and people don't want targets.
We become targets, yes, and that's exactly what happened when we had a meeting on November the 6th at our regional meeting, and we had those locals that were representing at the time that were part of the, I guess you could say, the clique of the group there. They weren't happy with our regional council. They did not want to sit at the table. They stated we had illegal meetings, and then our president was told that he was going to officially become the new target for him. So I don't like it. It just became a lot of bullying, harassment, and I pretty much had to stand up on my own 2 feet. And I do, like, Audrey Punter has stood beside me through this time. It's just that financially the MNA did not financially support me at the time, and I didn't really want to ask, because I thought that, as being a person of integrity, I could do this on my own, and I wanted to take responsibility, because the MNA did not do this, didn't get me into this situation. I got myself into this, and I felt that I was able to defend myself, and I said eventually I'm going to be able to tell my side of the story, because since that time I've had to be quiet. And now it's pretty much there's going to be a decision, so now I can finally come forward and tell my side of the story.
That's right. And you know what? I think your story and what you've gone through as a strong Métis woman will inspire others. That, I mean, a lot of times when we speak the truth, we have to stand alone. But I mean, the way I look at it, we look at it, at least we can look ourselves in the mirror each morning and to say that we've spoken the truth, we've seeked the truth. And I mean, if you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. And I mean, you just got to keep speaking the truth in hopes that one day our people will wake up.
Exactly, and that's another thing that we need is our Métis Judiciary Council to be in effect immediately. So this way we could address the issues and in our own traditional methods, rather than having to hire lawyers and spending money that we don't have. And our Métis Nation of Alberta can deal with the issues in our own judiciary system, in our own governance, rather than having to go and hire lawyers that we don't, money we don't have.
Exactly.
And that's one of the things, we need to be legally supported by the Métis Nation of Alberta. And like Audrey Putcher and Daniel Cardinal did support me in different ways. And basically, if I had something to ask, I did ask Audrey. But I didn't want to blame her for any of this, because I felt that because I thought basically if I say anything, they'd go after her, after the Métis Nation, and sue them. So I pretty much have to stay quiet.
Right, but you know what? That's a hard feeling though, because I think everybody in their life has encountered that situation where at the moment, or you've had to wait for the right time where you could speak, and it's hard to contain the truth within you, and it gets frustrating when you see all this going on and you can't speak the truth. And like I said, we can only hope. We've got to keep pushing and pushing to awaken our people to assert their rights, where we're not again still in the vicious circle of the colonial arena.
Exactly, and we are matriarchs in the traditional ways, and the men should be protecting us, not silencing us because of money.
Exactly.
Our rights and our identity and our land is front and foremost, and our collective rights aren't for sale. And that's what I was trying to prevent happening, because then otherwise we're going to be competing with other third-party entities, and they're going to be going and dealing with industry and basically saying, oh, they represent us when they don't. And this has been going on for years, and that's the reason why I spoke out. And I like I said, I pretty much have to take responsibility for my own action. I can't point fingers at anybody else, and I told the truth the whole time. So I have to stand with my Métis integrity. And yes, my name was defamed all over Alberta and across Canada, but I did it for the people. I did it for my ancestors. I did it for myself, my future generation. And I'm hoping that the women out there will say, you know what, Corianne, you did right. You honestly did right. You stood up for us, not just for myself and future generations, because this has got to stop. This stuff about, nepotism and corruption, misusing, misrepresentation. We're a collective. If you represent the collective, that means you represent the collective as a whole, not individually.
Absolutely. And Corianne, I want to personally, as a Métis woman, I want to personally thank you for having the courage, the integrity to stand up and have your voice heard. I think you are a great role model. You're an inspiration to other Métis women, and I'm hoping that you telling part of your story will inspire other Métis women to step forward and to use their voice, because the voice has been silenced for so long. And again, I thank you. I really, really do, because your story inspires me.
Thank you, and I thank both of you for allowing me to have a voice, because that my voice has been silenced for a few years, and I had to wait patiently for my opportunity to speak. But I wasn't going to just curl up and die, go into depression. I basically found different ways to cope, and I went back to my traditional ways. I earned a sacred pipe in the process. And I do believe I honored my ancestors and my family. And I do believe that I'm not just representing myself, I'm representing the collective as a whole. And I do believe our people need to have more accountability, more transparency. And if you're going to represent us, at least bring the money back to the regional table and feed us. Don't watch us starve, because we're not discarded shoes. we're not nobodies. We're a collective. You represent all of us. Kakio, Nisanan. That's what my ancestors would have said to them.
Absolutely. And like I said, you're invited on our show anytime you would like. It would be an honor to feature a strong woman such as you.
Well, I thank you for giving me that opportunity. I'm very grateful.
Well, do you have any final words for the people out there listening before we wrap it up here?
I have one request, and my one request is for the ladies out there that have felt stifled and silenced and don't feel that they're adequate or their voices aren't heard. Please speak up, because like I do believe that Audrey Pudra and Daniel Cardinal will represent us, and I know Audrey and Daniel are not going to stand idly by and allow this to happen after this has happened to me. And it's basically, I'm going to be an example for not just this generation, but the next generation as I become an elder. And I want women and future generations to speak up against any men or men of authority and men in leadership, and use your voice, because sometimes that's all we got. And don't drop the ball. If you believe that you are being truthful and uphold Métis integrity, you have nothing to worry about.
All right, that's awesome.
That's awesome. Again, thank you very much. And like I said, you're welcome back on our show anytime.
Well, thank you to both of you, and it was an honor.
Okay. We'd like to thank Corran Pruden for joining us. And let's look at who's suing her. Fort McKay is the one suing Coran. And Ron Quintel put it all over social media. Ron is the guy that did the smear campaign against Coran. This is a guy, Ron Quintel. Smear campaign on a Métis woman, trying to silence a Métis woman. I mean, this is a damn shame.
So, part of the Fort McKay Métis Community Association and its elected president, Ron Riel Quintel, who placed it all over social media, smearing Corran Pruden for standing up, for asking questions. Corran Pruden wouldn't back down. Kudos to her for standing up to Ron Quintel and the Fort McKay Metis.
And we're going to be looking more into you, Ron. But anyway, let's look more at the Fort McKay. In case you forgot at the beginning of the show, Fort McKay Metis Group CEO charged with sexual assault. Again, innocent until proven guilty. But there he is, charged with sexual assault. Now, we're talking about the abuse of Métis women, the silencing of Métis women. This cannot be allowed. And I hope if you got anything out of the show today with Coran, I hope that you gain some type of empowerment and you're willing to rise up, Métis women, and speak out against the sexual assaults, the rapes, the misconduct that's happening all in the Métis Nation, all over Canada, and different various Métis organizations.
And it has been alleged, with certain people we've spoke to, it's been alleged that Quintel had been engaged in election fraud, and it's been alleged he had been engaged in bribery to cover up sexual abuse.
Well, yeah. And
Alleged.
Alleged, but you know what? It's alleged right now. But guess what Métis Warrior's going to do? We're going to look into it, and we'll get rid of the allegation, and we'll either make it the fact or the false. So it's going to either be the truth or the false, and we're going to prove it. If it's out there and he done it, we will prove it.
And I think Métis Warrior will certainly be taking a closer look at the Fort McKay Metis group. There seems to be a lot of things going on behind the scenes that I think we should be bringing to light.
And if anybody from the Fort McKay Metis group wants to contact Métis Warrior, and if you feel like that anything you heard in this show is wrong, we invite you onto the show. We know that various guests have came onto the show and answered questions. If you are innocent of the allegations, come on to our show. And if you're going to run and hide and try to avoid the questions, and you are corrupt we're going to out you for it. And you're going to sue Corran Pruden for trying to out you. Well, now you got Métis Warrior coming at you.
And this has been alleged, and we're going to look into this deeper. It's been alleged that Quintel, again, had been involved in covering up sexual abuse scandal, and it's been alleged by paying women $10,000 to stay silent about the alleged assault. So if anybody has information that wants to talk to us about this alleged scandal by paying, it's been alleged, women $10,000 to stay silent, and any information about Mr. Quintel, we'd be more than eager to hear you.
Yeah, we definitely want to hear you. Look at your screen. That's our Gmail account. And actually, if anybody from Fort McKay Metis want to come out and talk with us, you're invited to do so. We do say people are innocent until proven guilty. But if we do find the corruption during our investigation, then guess what? We're damn sure going to do a show on it. And there ain't no way in hell you're going to silence Métis Warrior. You're not going to do it. And so, because what we put out will be factual. And but if we don't find any corruption, then of course we're not going to put it out. It would be in someone's best interest to come on and answer the allegations. I feel if they think they are innocent, why not come on to the show, answer the allegations, and let the people hear. Let the people hear your side of the story. I mean, you know, we're all for that, right? But if you're guilty of election fraud, if you're guilty of paying women $10,000 to cover up things, you know we're going to find it out. Again, that's our Gmail. If anybody has any information concerning Ron Quintel, please email us. That's it for me.
Take care, guys.